All right, we're back at it. Progress note. I believe this is 20. Man, we've done 20 progress notes now. This is
It
great.
might be 21.
Is it 21? It might be
What number,
21.
everybody? We don't even know. We need to figure out. By the time this gets published, we'll figure it out. We've done quite a few.
Yeah.
So let's so what is the progress? Should we update people?
To what we're going to be doing on this? Oh, for our lives. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've been traveling a little bit. So why don't how was Morocco?
It was good. It was good. It was interesting. I didn't plan it as well as I should have. Well, I did, but then plans changed in the middle, and I think I did end up doing a lot of inner city travel and didn't account for that, and so exhausted. A lot of traveling actually back and forth. Came back 3 days later, went back to California and stuff, and so taking a little bit of break. I know you're going to Europe. I booked my ticket for
Mhm.
London. I'll be going to London end of February too, but
Nice.
just need to chill for 2 months. Need to relax
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah. Absolutely. Awesome, man.
But dude, current events, man, life's been crazy. So let's start about that. Let's talk about the insurance evildoers. We love to bash insurance companies here, and I know we just talked to a guest about this, and that'll be released in the future.
Yeah.
But at this point, I'm sure everybody or most people who are at least tuned into social media has heard about what happened to the CEO for United Healthcare. Tragic. Blue Cross Blue Shield tried to put out this asinine policy that we're just going to stop paying for anesthesia in the middle of surgeries. I don't really understand what was the person who proposed that? Like, how did they think that was going to come across?
I'm
It,
speechless, man. I don't know.
yeah. And you and I were talking about this offline earlier, man. I think I was just um, disappointed. I was taken back by the response from the general public about that individual who got killed in I guess, the middle of the Manhattan. Is that what
Yeah,
happened?
like 6 a.m. Coming out of his luxury hotel. The quote unquote assassin, what's his name, Luigi something, 26-year-old. Yeah, just 3D printed gun, by the way. Um, and the bullet had the inscription of like certain words that were actually used by United Healthcare. So this was well thought out and planned. Seemed like he had a personal history of like chronic pain too, and then he lost his grandmother and grandfather within the last 10 years, and so I think he was very frustrated with the healthcare system and losing loved ones, and he's always kind of believed in anti-capitalism. Even though he was a tech whiz, he had his own app that he was creating after he went to UPenn, but he's just very frustrated with kind of the sentiment around how these insurance companies, like you talked about, can just dictate certain policies and rules where lives get affected.
It's again scary, and you and I are faced with interaction with the healthcare system on a daily basis just by the nature of what we do. And when we look
Mm-hmm.
at it, we sit behind a different seat. But and again, both you and I have been touched by cancer in our lives with somebody who's really close to us, and
Mm-hmm.
so we've also experienced it from the other side. Um, and and you get a sense of how frustrating it can be. And so we've seen both sides of it, I think. But I just imagine how bad must have it been for a 26-year-old to have, and somebody who's seemingly a high intellectual,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to get that far. And that piece that I sent you from Tangle, we should plug that for the listeners here. I think that's like the one scary part, where they talk about how long is it going to be if we tolerate this type of behavior, how long is it going to be before providers, both you and I, often
Right.
by the nature of what we do, end up prescribing opioid medication. We know what that can be like in somebody who's drug seeking and whatnot. In fact, actually, one of my co-residents, who he was a couple of years ahead of me, but he had talked about an orthopedic surgeon. I think this was in Tennessee. No, actually, it was Ohio area, but it was somebody that he had known, he had practiced with in that area previously, who a clinician, orthopedic surgeon, was leaving a practice, and a post-op patient, um, while he was going home at the end of the day at the clinic, came back and killed him, broad daylight.
Jeez.
And it was an issue with not providing sufficient medication and that kind of stuff. And so the scary thing that I take away from that is like, okay, like, we can't condone this type of stuff. And I don't think majority of the people are, right. Like the
Right.
negative always outweighs that. But, you just go back to, it's like, how bad does it have to get where we've come to this type of stuff happening?
No, absolutely. It's been interesting. There's a lot of threads, and when I say threads, I mean the actual app threads, where people have written now about the ethical dilemma of a CEO getting shot, and kind of the response to why people are rooting for the killing of this man, the murder of this man, and a lot of it has to do with the sentiment of that we're at. People feel like we're at war with insurance companies, and we have now taken out one of the leaders of that, right? Almost if we're looking at a terrorist organization and how we celebrated the killing of Saddam Hussein, for example. And so people have this riled up, revolution being quote unquote
Mm,
on the good side, going against the bad side,
hmm.
and forgetting about the fact that, yeah, this man had kids and he was married and he had loved ones, that, has left behind now. And so it's been very interesting, some of these threads talking about how in New York City alone, you have maybe 300 murders, 3,000 murders a year, but yet this one is the one highlighted. And if we're going to talk
Mm.
about this being a life just like everyone else's and that we should care, well, then we also need to step back and care about all those other lives, that have been lost. And if we're going to offer a $50,000 reward for catching whoever killed Brian Thompson, then why are we not offering rewards, to the others? And so, you can see it. It's a very gray back and forth kind of what theme and what lens do you want to see it in? And that's definitely going to change, I feel like, the perspective of how we view what's going on and what the future of that means.
Yeah, that's interesting, and a really good point that you make. And right, we're coming back to it's like, okay, well, we should appreciate the human behind whatever the policies you might have that you might disagree with, and this is not necessarily the way to handle conflict. But what's interesting about that, that seems to be the case in terms of any public facing conflict that's handled. I mean, let's just take the whole election cycle over the last 8 years, right? I think I had shared a clip with you where it was John McCain, with some of
Mm-hmm.
his own party, where somebody had gone after Obama, and that was in 2012. And John McCain quickly stopped them and said, "Nope, he's a good man. He's not this. He's not this. And we're not going to belittle the other party. We're not going to, attack the other person's character." And that's changed very, very drastically over the next
Right.
decade. 2020 election was completely different, even 2016. And
Mm-hmm.
so, it might be easy to say, okay, you can blame a certain individual, certain individuals who've made people feel like that is an appropriate way to handle conflict. But I think that would be just too simple to say that. And I'm curious what you think that what do you attribute that to, that more and more people are comfortable condoning and even saying that is an appropriate way to handle discourse.
Yeah, I think it's really just the fact that everyone's writing this behind a curtain, right? I mean, we don't know who's writing this. We're never going to see these people in our lives, and everyone can now voice an opinion without any fault. You go to a town
Mm,
hall, no one's going to speak up besides one or two of those people who are really,
right.
really, really believe it. And I think it's almost like comedy, right? Where comedians have the ability to say what we're all thinking and not get in trouble for it. And so I think, yeah, this is kind of the sentiment of what people are feeling. And I think what we do as humans is that we test the boundary, right? We put out these feelings and we, one, see how it feels to ourselves, but two, wait, is everyone else feeling the same thing? And so you kind of rally the troops without knowing that you are. And then once everyone kind of sees this domino effect of, oh, a lot of people are saying, yes, this is great. This is what we should be doing. And all the other CEOs should be afraid. Hopefully this leads to change. It's like the common psyche of a revolution that people think is going to happen without realizing that, hey, these are just words that you're spewing off a keyboard and not actually taking action in real life, going to actual meetings and actually going to Congress and talking about these issues with real solutions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough, man. I mean, definitely condolences to that person. And to those who don't know, glad, coming back to Blue Cross, glad that they reversed that policy. Again, just absolutely wild. But what was interesting, I told you about Dr. Glockenflocken talking about the power of social media for advocacy, and he made a video about that as well, which was timely. But I think just the uproar in the general community and the general public, where Blue Cross rolled out the policy and then pretty quickly was like, okay, this is not going to work, and then rolled that back. So I think there is something to be said about advocacy through social media and speaking up. But to your point about, people or lack of accountability and sitting behind a screen and being able to say this and that, whereas in a town hall, you wouldn't do that.
And
I think there's something to be said about that for sure.
for those that don't know, can you just explain in detail what the policy was about anesthesia and surgery?
Yeah, crazy. So so Anthem, which is Blue Cross, it's a maybe a subsidiary of Blue Cross, and I guess certain states Anthem is going to be the one. So like for New Jersey, it's Horizon, and Pennsylvania is different. But Blue Cross Blue Shield has multiple different versions of that. So Anthem came out with a policy that um, they are basically going to look at all the surgery procedures that happen, anything that requires general anesthesia. And this is when you get intubated and you're completely out. I think it was only for general anesthesia. I could be wrong. It could be for just like twilight sleep as well. That they're gonna come up with essentially a template that suggests that, okay, this type of procedure is supposed to take this much time, right? So laparoscopic cholecystectomy, where they take your gallbladder out, should take 60 minutes, no more. And so we're only going to pay for anesthesia for whatever that predetermined time is, that's somewhat arbitrary that they're going to determine. And any time after that, if a surgery goes beyond that, the surgeons will not be getting paid, but they're not going to pay for the anesthesia. So the anesthesia is not getting paid. Like, so that cost is going to come back onto the patient. And um, absolutely crazy to think that they were going to do that, because I mean, now you can imagine, like, uh, when if you're a proceduralist, and I from time to time use anesthesia for my procedures, things go wrong. Sometimes you have complications. Sometimes you get into a procedure and it ends up being tricky. Sometimes there's an equipment issue, and so things get delayed. And so a lot of surgeons actually came back. I think the lady spine doc was talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
As like surgeons are going to feel pressured and pressed for time. Well, how likely are they going to be to make more medical errors? So absolutely crazy thought. Can't believe it actually like even was proposed. I'm so glad that it's been reversed. But you know what's crazy about that, dude? I'm not going to be surprised until the next ridiculous policy comes out. Like, it's going to
Yeah,
happen. I also wouldn't be surprised, like, if they've secretly passed another absurd policy quietly under the table, as they've like
as
done a
it's
little
going
like
on. Hmm.
illusionist thing with everybody. Like, so we
Yeah,
should probably look into that. Like, this is my faith in the insurance system. Like,
I,
they've probably done something like that.
it just, I just, it makes zero sense to me. Man. I just, I'm like stuttering here because I don't even know what to say. Like, man, how do they not think like, yeah? Have you ever worked with a surgeon that's like, you know what? Let me just take an extra 4 hours, because that's healthy to give more anesthesia. What do they think? Obviously, these people are trying to be efficient and safe at the same time. I mean, that's
Yeah,
what improves outcomes overall. Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know. Sign me.
So let's shift from that,
Anyhow,
right? So you talked about
yeah.
people being anti-capitalist, and I wanted to talk to you about this last time, about anti-establishment content creators.
Mm,
We see a lot of that. We see so much of that, and I get it, right? The algorithm feeds that. Hence, I mean, our podcast, our logo, everything about
hmm
our mission, in some sense, has been about that too, right? That we've talked about. But
hmm
you've seen a lot of that lately, and I really want to reference back to that health summit that Senator Johnson had, where I think it was in September of this year, 2024, where he had all these experts, some I'll put in quote experts, health experts, come in front of Congress and present the argument of how America is unhealthy, and our food and this and that, and the system is really corrupt in many ways, and how all these people with their respective specialties and what they were passionate about talked about how they're going to make the system better. What was interesting about that situation in particular, and we talked about this with Heather Hammerstead as well, that you had individuals who were perceived experts and maybe not necessarily true experts, right? And so you have
hmm
people with a journal and media background sitting up there in front of Congress talking about our foods, right? You had people, actually, you had multiple journalists up there. You had some physicians, but maybe didn't even complete their training out there, talking about metabolic health and that kind of stuff. Again, so food, you had some really credible sources as well, like Dr. Marty McCary. We've highlighted him a couple of times, who I think has been nominated for the head of the FDA now, also talking about just the corruption of the healthcare system. And so that just got me to thinking in terms of how these people communicate. Now we've done an episode on this, or like how to find a medical, like a true expert on social media, right? Lane Norton had this really great framework of thinking about that. But I was just thinking about like these people, and I've been listening to them on social media. Particularly Casey and Callie Means. They have a book called Good Energy out there. They're doing a lot of great work, but they have interesting phrasing when they communicate health information. And so before I go any further, I kind of just want to get your take in terms of as you've ingested some of this information over the last couple of months, um, what's been the feel that you've gotten?
I think it's made me change my definition, or may not even change, but think deeply about what an expert is. And so, my framework, at least for that, is we're all experts at something. What do I mean by that? We're all experts in the realm of what we pushed that we know. So, Altamash, you're an expert in your life, right? No one else will understand that because
Mm,
you have experienced the things that you have. I'm an expert in my understanding of the way the world works based off my understanding. Now, when you take that notch further to looking at, oh, are they medical experts or are they experts in nutrition and diets? The way I look at that is one, do you have an understanding of the past, present, and possible future of the data, of the research, and the overall trends of what has happened? Two, are you keeping up with what the current data is and are you able to speak on it? And number three, are you able to have positive discussions about it? Are you willing to change your mind? Are you willing to have a some sort of an opinion on what it's showing, but are you also, not completely one-sided? And so that's kind of the way I look at what an expert is now. And for instance, I look at Peter Attia as an expert. I think he really does a really good job of all three of those things. He looks at where we were in the past with medicine. He talks about medicine 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, the future. He is always staying up to date with the latest research, reads it himself, tries to break it down, has a team, and then lastly, is willing to change his opinion, which he also talks about too. And so for me, he's somebody that I quote unquote trust because I know he's done the work. And it doesn't seem like he has a lopsided agenda besides which I think one can all agree upon is trying to make people healthier and make people understand their own bodies and understand what they can take away from the current treatments. So that's kind of at least how I felt about it.
yeah, no, I love that. I think that's really important to for people to take away. I think yes, you are an expert in your life. You are an expert in your domain of what it is that you
It's a good
do.
word.
But don't misconstrue that for thinking that you are or somebody else is an expert in something you're interested in.
Mm,
And those are two different things, right? So nutrition is the big one that people always reference. Is we all feel like we can give nutrition advice because we engage in it so much, multiple times throughout the day. We feel like we have opinions on it, and we have an experience, right? That's resonated in our life. Something's worked for me, therefore it must work. And physiology is complicated, human beings are complicated, and so just
yep.
because something's worked for you doesn't mean that that's going to work for other people. And there's a lot of nuance to this, right? I mean, so even as clinicians, and we've both of you at this point, we've seen thousands of patients, and we on a monthly basis probably see a few hundred, and we still are just like learning, and we like every single day I'm learning from patients. And so I think that's the one challenge when it comes to giving out health information. It's very complex. The body's very complex. Our understanding of it is actually quite limited. And together, that's a recipe for disaster. And if you especially cannot piece out and tear apart um, information and be able to actually acquire knowledge and then distribute knowledge in a
Mhm.
responsible way, like maybe you shouldn't necessarily have a platform. And I think about this. I want to go back to Peter Attia though. Like again, I agree with you, big fan of him. But there are people that I respect and I listen to, who will also say that maybe some of his science communication is a little bit too far and it's
Mhm.
actually harmful. Right. For instance, he I think in one of his
Yeah.
AMAs, and now this is a couple of years ago, he had talked about the use of GLP-1 agonists, and really looking forward to hopefully getting an expert on here so we talk about that and his concern with that raising heart rate. And we know that anytime you raise somebody's resting heart rate, that most likely, I mean, I cannot think of a physiological response where you raise somebody's heart rate aside from like true bradycardia, but with your physical, where that's going to be good for mortality. It just
Hmm.
can't possibly be true, right? And so he has expressed some concerns about that. But then there's other people who are big proponents of GLP-1 and these anti-obesity medications, obesity docs, some of whom we're hoping to get on here, who really just bashed him for that observation in his own patient population. I think that's another important thing too, is like when we get behind this mic, when we get behind a platform and you are sharing your experiences versus being pedantic about what you think people should be doing. Those are two different things, right? So if you and I have a conversation and you say, hey, here's what I found in my experience, and this concerns me about patients and this specific medications, that's very different than people shouldn't be on this because this is bad for your heart rate and therefore it's going to lead to, because
Right.
there's nuance to this, right? There's benefits and risks.
Exactly.
And the thing that concerns me in particular is when people use a lot of hyperbole for things. And I get why. Maybe this is why we haven't gone viral yet, you and I, Darsh, is because we tend not to do this as much. And maybe this is our
Yeah.
downfall. But when I think about, Casey Means, she doctor, she graduated from Stanford, poor Stanford. Like the amount of times she's bashed Stanford Medical School for not teaching her nutrition, which is probably true, right? No medical school is really giving good quality nutrition advice. Most of the people advice that we're getting nutritionally is like from a biochemistry lens. But the amount of time Stanford Medical School has gotten bashed, they probably hate it, right?
Yeah.
That was the first thought that, but I hear her using words like, these foods, the things that we're consuming are weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
That's a very powerful, you know,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
it's great for clicks, that phrase, and it's great to be able to capture your attention. Weapons of mass destruction. We're talking about nuclear weapons. Like
Yeah.
that's how potent this thing is. And I'm
Right.
not
Right.
sure Kit Kat is the same as weapons of mass destruction. You
Damn.
know
I
what I
just had a
mean?
Kit Kat today.
Love Kit Kat. Love it. Snickers, better Snickers, but I
I
love
had
Kit
the
Kat.
I had the UK version, by the way, so a little different.
Ooh, oh,
Yeah.
that might be better.
It's not as sugary. Yeah.
Right. No red 40 in that one,
There's
right?
no red 40. That's right. That's right. That's a true weapon of mass destruction.
Yeah. But things like that, right? And so her brother Callie Means, who he's got actually an amazing website which tries
Hmm.
to get you reimbursed through your FSA or HSA for healthcare services. So we'll
Hmm.
plug that. I'm actually trying to get
True
involved in
med.
that
Yeah.
or see if I can get a TrueMed. Right? That's right. Yeah, your 8 Sleep or whatever. You can get your FSA stuff for that. I think that's phenomenal, right? I think he's a lawyer by background, if I'm not
I'm actually not
mistaken.
sure. Might be. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he might be an attorney for background, but he's got this amazing company, and they're trying to do that. That you should be able to invest in your health, and if you can use FSA, for those who don't know FSA, it's called a flexible spending account or a healthcare savings account, flexible savings account. I'm not sure what exactly it is, but basically you can use these funds. These are pre-tax funds, and you can use it towards healthcare expenses. And most of the time, people can use it for doctor's payments, for copays, medication, et cetera, for healthcare expenses. The argument that these guys make with TrueMed, their company, is that, well, your gym membership is a healthcare expense. Your
Hmm.
8 Sleep tech device is a healthcare expense, right? It's getting promoting good quality sleep, et cetera. I love that. You love that. I think that is a phenomenal idea. I wish we came up with it. But the same token, like, he gets on, I think maybe Chris Williams' podcast or maybe the Diary of a CEO, and talking about how big pharma controls literally everything that we do, right? And it's just like
Hmm.
making big pharma out to be this evil doing. It's like, okay, I see what you're talking about. I see the whole capitalistic thing. That's what make America America. Yeah, the healthcare system is bad, but I'll reference people to Peter Attia's episode where he had Sam, I forgot the guy's name, who talked about
Hmm.
how, yes, our system is a problematic, but UK is not much better. And I can say this,
Hmm.
I have family who practices in UK and I have family who practices in Canada. And it's not, you be careful what you wish for.
Right.
And I don't go a little bit of a rant here, but he talks about like that and just making up out to be such a bad thing. Whereas if it wasn't for big pharma, heart disease, people would be dying from heart disease at 50 still. Cancer, people wouldn't be living an extra 20 years with cancer. Like big pharma has done a lot of great things for us.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think I'll add one more mental model here when I think about experts, and that's looking way into the future and way into the past, right? So I don't think any of us can name an expert from 300 years ago that
Mm,
you would relate to today. You know what I mean? Like we're all experts in the current present moment. But if we look in the next 7,500 years, a lot of what we think right now that is true is going to be not true in 70 years. So we're doing is the best that we can. So when people are listening to certain influencers and certain advisors and scientific thought leaders, keep in mind that these are just judgments. This is what we think is true. This is what we have right now. But in no mean by no means does it mean that is quote unquote the truth, and that is what's going to hold the test of time, in the near future.
Yeah. The challenge is, and I think this is maybe a little bit my intention with this is a bit of a PSA for people. Is just be careful when you are consuming this stuff on social media, on just regular media, TV and news and that kind of stuff, because even when you're not trying to, it has a significant impact, even passively, like how much information we absorb. And not only, you're talking about what we think we know is, so a lot of these experts, they might know more than you, but they might not be necessarily like an expert in that specific domain. So I talked about some of those journalists who were up there who were, I don't want to necessarily say masquerading because they are quite knowledgeable. I don't
Right.
think you need to have necessarily a degree to be savvy and expert in something, right?
Sure.
Um, I think particularly with information as accessible as it is, like, if you have access to studies, you have access to that. Although treating patients, there is something to be learned from that. And if you're not doing that, then maybe you should be cautious. Um, how they communicate. So what they'll say is like, okay, 40% of people who do this, like this is what happens to their hormone. And that might be coming from one study. It might be a human study. It might not be an in vitro study or in a petri dish. It might actually be a human study. It might not be an animal study, but it might be one study. And it might be an observation study in 8 human beings. We talked about this. Most people are not necessarily too lazy, they just don't have the time to fact check every single thing that they hear when they're listening to a podcast, when they're listening to something on YouTube. I remember Lane Norton talking about this when Paul Saladino went on some show on Joe Rogan, talking about the carnivore diet. It took him 41 hours to dissect every single thing.
Hmm.
There's no, you couldn't pay me enough money to be able to spend. Well, I guess you could pay me enough money, but um, like
Yeah.
who's doing that, right? So you just you take you take their word for what it is. But the other interesting thing that I find is how they communicate the message. So coming back to Casey Means, she's phenomenal at this. So we were talking about Vanessa Van Edwards. She was talking about like your cues that you give with your voice, right? So there's the story voice. Let me tell you about a time, or there's the numbers voice. 47% of people, blah blah blah, this and that, and how excellent TED speakers, you are one of them, um, are able to do different things and how they cue you and how that makes you believe a certain thing.
Hmm.
And there is something to be said. If you listen to how these people communicate, you'll find that it actually is raising your anxiety level, right?
Hmm.
Going back to what you've spoken about earlier, is like you got to trust that a little bit. If all you're hearing is fear, world is ending, doom, 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 maybe just question like, is it really that bad?
Yeah.
Like, am I going to die right now? Like, as I inhale this air quality, is it going to be really that bad? Because you talk
Yeah.
about Morocco coming from, I've been to third world countries.
Sand.
We've been to, have you ever been to India?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So you've been to
No,
India. I've
it's,
been to Pakistan, right?
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's a different world. Like, so it's
Yeah.
not that bad,
Yeah.
And so
Not at
that would
all.
be my one thing is like, just listen to how they communicate. And I think that's really important too, man.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I totally agree. So, yeah.
Sweet. Anything else to add to that? We didn't even touch on
Hmm.
RFK Jr. and his role making America healthy again.
Uh,
Did you have anything on that?
we can. Yeah. I think he's interesting, right? I mean, we talk about this all the time: polarization, putting words in people's mouths. Right now the biggest thing about him is he going to make a difference, right? His policy and trying to open the rug to see what everything has been swept under. He wants to make vaccines a little bit more researchable, rather than kind of just putting it out. But a lot of people think of that as an anti-vax statement, right? And then I guess he's been on podcasts where he's had those statements and maybe that hyperbole. And so again, I think when we see hyperbole, we need to judge people based off what's their end goal, and is that why they're saying the hyperbole, and is that what they actually mean? So personally, I'm a big fan of actually having RFK in there. Do I agree with everything that he stands for? No. But I think we do need a shakeup, at least in regards to health and policy and whatever it is. Because again, like you said, is the world going to end with him being, by Trump's side? No. But hey, maybe it's the start of something where people can get inspired, where maybe farm companies or whoever might be, in bed with policymakers might be shaking in their boots a little. So, let's see what happens. But I think it'll be interesting. It's funny how this cycle I've really gotten more into politics.
Yeah. Yeah, you seem to be much more knowledgeable about it than I do. I also find it interesting that because everything is time stamped and everything is always accessible, like if you say something on a podcast, on a YouTube channel, and then maybe if 5 times after that you say something that directly opposes that, or you've changed your mind,
Yeah,
people will find that first clip, not the other five, to be able to defame you in some manner, to be able to say that. And maybe that's happened with him. Maybe it's not. I'm not necessarily saying in his case, but I do find there's somebody that you and I are thinking about that's just going after all these people with just vitriol, and we find it to be comical. Um, eh, so again, I think look at the another one. I guess I said this is like, I think one of the things I also, I should just speak for myself, and one of the things that I try to do, because I'm also human, and I ingest this as just as much as the next person, and I find myself having, even from some of this fear-based response, I find myself having a little bit of anxiety. And so what I try to do is, I try to look at the body of work of that person. Like, what if they communicated consistently, and what does they believe? And you try to look at the most up to date thing, because if you're not developing your opinions, if you're not seeing what you thought 5 years ago was wrong, or at the very least you've added some nuance to that, then I'm not really sure that you're a person who I want to continue listening to. So
yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's all I'll say to that, to
for
put a bow
sure.
on it, unless you got anything else.
No, I think one of my biggest pet peeves, again, we're talking about people who change their minds. I know a couple of people in real life who are quick to say something because they know they can apologize about it later, right? And I
Mm,
don't think that's the right way of doing something. I don't think you can
mm,
have a strong opinion just to say it so that later on you can be like, well, see, at least I apologize, or like, see, at least I changed my mind. Like, you don't get a
hmm.
reward for changing your mind. You get a reward for trying to be authentic and then going through a discussion and explain that journey of how you changed your mind. You know what I mean? And I think
Right.
that is important to see. It's just tough to see in social media, and because we get glimpses of RFK, we get glimpses of these politicians and people, but we don't get to see their actual journey. And so that's why I love, like Joe Rogan's podcast and these long form podcasts, because you really get the time to sit down and actually understand what's going on through this person's mind to see how they got to their opinion.
Wow. Yeah, I really love that. I think, yeah, a lot of respect for the person where you ask them, hey, here's something that I came across. What do you think about this? And their initial response might be, I don't know enough about that yet to comment on it. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
like I'm going to be thoughtful about what opinion that I share. And rather than just quickly respond, oh my God, blah, 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 this, and then come back like, wait a second, like I didn't have all the facts. Because even when you're hearing stories from somebody else, you're getting it from a different lens, right? You talked about this, and you
Yeah.
and I look at things differently all the time. And so it's always interesting, do your own research, and arrive at your own conclusions. Don't let people persuade you into thinking one way or another. So,
Exactly.
anyways, interesting
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Um, should we talk about therapy culture? I'm not sure
Yeah.
how
Let's
we
do it.
transition, but I think that's important. Um,
Yeah.
something you and I have been talking about, I think really important. Um, yeah, I think this is one of those areas you and I might have a little bit of difference in
Hmm.
opinion. So I'm interested to kind of
Yeah.
talk about it with you. So maybe lay down the foundation in terms of how we arrived at this conversation, the podcast that you share with Mark Manson, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's funny how these topics kind of just come up in our lives through multiple streams, right? And that's what I love about listening to these like philosophical growth mindset, just learning about general knowledge podcasts. So this topic, therapy and therapy culture, right? So we know that there's been a big rise in mental health issues, and there's also been a big rise in people seeking out therapy and therapists. I've come to this topic through a podcast with Chris Williamson on modern wisdom, where he talked about the greatest philosopher of all time, Socrates, and how the Socratic method and Socrates viewed therapy and viewed discourse and viewed mental health issues. Um, and then there was a second podcast, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F by Mark Manson, book with the same title, who talks about therapy culture as a whole. And is it actually doing a disservice in today's world by how scalable it's gotten, is the word he uses. So what I loved about that first podcast with Socrates is, I really resonate with the idea of having an intellectual sparring partner, right? Which is you for me for you. We've kind of come to this conclusion before we revamped this podcast was like, hey, we need to be in each other's lives like soulmates because we can bounce ideas off each other when sometimes it shouldn't be our immediate family members or shouldn't be, some of our other friends, but it should just be each other who are on the same wavelength and are okay with disagreeing, okay with building up on ideas that we agree on. And so to me, that discourse itself is therapy because I can listen to a podcast, I can formulate my thoughts, and then I can come to you and say, hey, what do you think about this? This is how I think about it. And that immediately offers another perspective, no matter what. You're never going to have 100% the same perspective as me. So that feedback itself is therapy, right? And so what happens is in ancient Greece, the reason why Socrates was supposed to be this great philosopher is because he was questioning everyone. And Socrates never thought he knew all the answers. And so I don't think mental health for him, quote unquote, existed because he was able to see everyone's perspectives in life, from children to adults to the elderly. And I think what we're missing in today's world is that ability to have your friends over, 4 or 5 people, and just chat about what you're going through, what your perspectives are on life, what you thought about X and Y and Z, and how you should maybe reframe that and what other people are going through. And so I think when you have the understanding of other people's lives, it puts yours into perspective as not the only one that's quote unquote right. And so that is kind of at least my thought process behind this. And I'll let you explain yours and then we can kind of, go a little back and forth too as far as what we think.
Yeah, no, I think when you paint it that way, I generally agree with that. We've talked about about the power of and the importance of social connection multiple times, and we're not talking about just necessarily in one other person, but a community, a tribe,
Mm-hmm.
not being tribal, but a
Right.
tribe, and how critical that is. I love that the one-to-one perspective is really important. We have that because we do this behind the mic, we do this off the mic. You and I basically talk on a daily basis. We're sharing stuff on multiple mediums that we're communicating about this. The therapy culture piece is really interesting because I see this, especially in Gen Z, and I guess what's after Gen Z, Gen Alpha.
Uh, yeah, it's
Um,
alpha.
it's this increasing societal emphasis on therapy as the default response to just emotional and psychological challenges, just normal everyday life. Did I ever read that piece to you from Hormozy, talking
Uh,
about like living daily life and not being challenging? I
I don't
wrote
think
this
so.
down because I thought it was interesting. He was talking about his grandfather and being a physician, and then maybe his parents were
Hmm.
physicians too. What he was complaining a little bit about was like he hated the overprescription of medication and whatnot. But I think, and this is part of it that he says, I hate what it does to people, and more the underlying thing is that they reject being human, and they think there's something wrong with them. And so
Hmm.
many people waste all of their time trying to solve a problem that is life rather than living it, and it drives me nuts. Like they search for medication rather than confronting the problem. Like you don't have an anxiety problem. You need to deal with whatever the thing that you're worried about is.
Yeah,
I
I
think
remember him
that's
saying that. Yeah.
really, really important.
Hmm.
Um, I on social media, I follow these like millennial pages and whatnot, and they're always making fun of the Gen Z, talking about how I can't come into work because like your toxic energy is getting to me and that kind of stuff.
Okay, I know what you're
That's
talking about.
obviously it's obviously a little bit of a joke, and taking shots at different generations. But I do think that that is something that has gone a little overboard. And the other thing is like publicizing personal issues. I get where it comes from, right? So it's this sociological critique on the idea that let's cultivate being vulnerable and let's make that more of a norm and more acceptable,
Hmm.
and the reduction on self-reliance as hey, I'm going to grind this out by myself. Again, we talked about the importance of community, but that can be taken a little bit too far, right? Just normally saying, oh man, I'm just like I've been dealing with this anxiety, because it almost at that point becomes a crutch that, oh sorry, like here's a hard challenge, like I'm depressed right now,
Right.
right? As like you and I kind of grew up again. I'm an immigrant, so we were raised a little bit differently by my parents and stuff like that, where
Hmm.
depression wasn't even like, what is that? That's not a thing.
Hmm.
And so if you now you have mental health being able to recognize the importance and how it was under recognized for so long. Now if you publicize it, like I'm depressed, it's almost like you sometimes can maybe take it too far. I'm gonna get shit for this for sure, but it's
No,
okay.
it's fine. I'm
Um,
with you.
yeah, that people can almost say, "Oh, okay, now that person's untouchable." You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
if you're like a boss or something like that, and that scares me.
No, I agree. It gives you a card, not only to the employer but also to your followers, right? It
Mm,
lets them know, like, hey, I'm being super authentic with you, and it's almost like we're chasing that title. We're chasing that. Hey, we're feeling depressed. Let's advertise it. Let's let people know because it allows other people to, one, we think relatable. Like, sure, everyone goes through shit moods, but you don't need to label yourself as a quote unquote victim. Now, yes, there are people who are severely depressed, and I wonder honestly what their thoughts are on this,
mm,
because there's levels to that. Right? I mean, there's levels
right.
to anxiety, there's levels to depression, and so I wonder those who are actually severely depressed, who have gone through medications, and who actually have this like imbalance of the neurotransmitters and whatnot, and just this life that is colorless in a way, what they think about these people who advertise the way they feel constantly.
I was laughing. Have you seen the thing on social media about herpes influencers?
Maybe, I don't know. I don't think so. At
I
least.
have to send this to you, and if I can find it, we'll link it in the source. There's this guy. I think he's like in his late 30s or early 40s, and he's talking about. He's like, I never thought the day would come where people would be using herpes to
Yes,
monetize like their actual
yes,
genital herpes and stuff, and like so
I
that
know what
he
you're
was
talking
using
about.
some young person who was saying I struggle with herpes and was selling a course and how to cope and live life with herpes. And he was like, "What are we doing?" I find that
Tough life.
to be really really
It's a
funny.
tough life, dude.
A
Yeah,
little bit of a transition, but I think it applies here. And I think, but to come back on a serious note, and I do find this trend of just diagnosing normal emotional responses to be depression and anxiety. And maybe that's not the case. Maybe, and I'm very careful when people talk about this. I'm like, okay, you're in a depressed mood. This is not the same as depression. You're anxious, which is not the same
yeah.
thing. Anxiety, which is a medical
Mm,
condition, right?
mm-hmm.
Like, and it's really important because we don't want to
Good
make
point.
over diagnoses, and that, I mean, not only can that lead to unnecessary treatments, but it can. We talked to Dr. Robert Tiger about this, right? It can create
Yeah.
this self-labeling, which can have this vicious, perpetual negative feedback loop and make you more depressed, make you a sad person. And then I'm
Mm,
tying it all in with Vanessa Van Edwards. If you have that, all of a sudden your cues are dying down, and you suddenly become less likable in terms of what energy you're putting out into the world. And so, it gets to be really, really interesting. Um, and I want to actually tie that in with something else that I think is really interesting. Some of the words that people use, specifically like gaslighting, right?
mm,
Um, I don't think I've actually like legitimately ever used that word because I never
same.
really like understood what that meant. But I heard, forget who I heard talking about this, is people throw that word around like it. I don't think people truly understand what that means. And so maybe I think maybe to define it for those who are not familiar with gaslighting would be, when you have interaction with somebody and you might say something to that person and the person will respond, but you'll make that person feel like that this interaction isn't actually happening. I hope that come
Yeah, yeah.
across like,
It's like it's invalidating their thoughts
right.
through your response, right? Yeah.
Right. Yes, some version of that. And then people can feel free to look that up. But what's interesting is, people will start using that term in just normal conflict, right?
Hmm.
And I think I had heard this on Diary of CEO where some of these divorce experts had come on and they talked about people just think that like you and I can have a different perspective of something, right? So we might look at this problem and like, okay, so I think there's the famous thing about a dress looks gold to some people, blue to some people.
Mm.
You know what I'm
Hmm.
talking about? And
Yep.
I might
Yep.
put that picture up and I might say, Darsh, like, what color is this? And I see blue and you're like, that's gold. I'm like, are you gaslighting me, Darsh?
Yeah.
And it's like,
Exactly.
no, you're not, right? You just have a different perspective in how you're looking at it. And I don't remember the exact physiology of that color stuff that right there, but this
Yeah.
happens in things all the time, right?
Yeah.
So again, we can have a conflict, we can have an interaction. A week later, if let's say you and I didn't speak to each other, we come back and we revisit. We're like, hey, let's figure out this. Let's talk about this. You share your perspective, and I share my perspective, and our perspectives are completely different. And we're like, wait, you're gaslighting me because that's not what happened. But that's how you saw it happen. That's a story that you told yourself that your mind created.
Yeah,
And memory is really, really fungible. And in my mind, I remember the events in a different way. And again, it's not gaslighting, it's just different perspectives, different lenses, looking at the same problem in a different way. I always find
100%.
that to be so fascinating when people throw that term around. And I'm like, no, it's just how
And
I remember it. And you remember it completely differently. And that's fascinating.
I totally agree. There's like people like manipulation. Gaslighting is a form of manipulation. In no way am I trying to manipulate your reality. I'm just telling you my reality. But the problem
Right.
is that, we're getting softer and softer because of this whole advertisement of mental health and that it's okay to feel a certain way and that you should. Yes, as a human, you should have low moods. That's part of it, right? That's how you see the other spectrum of happiness.
Right.
But just because you have those low moods doesn't mean that you now have to fall into that trap of living there so that you feel like you can feel better because you live there. It's a
Mm,
very meta concept, but it's just like, I don't know where else to go with that. It's just it's funny
yeah.
because we're not manipulating. It's not a manipulation tactic. I'm just
Yeah.
telling you my reality and and
Yeah.
what I think about your reality, right? Like if I try to rephrase or say, that's what I think about what you're saying. I'm not trying to manipulate. I'm not trying to influence you.
Yeah. So I think
So
to bring it back and it kind of the things that I talked about in terms of like, all right, so therapy, I think it helps people skill up, right? I think the most powerful skill that we potentially could have, depending on what profession you're in, but probably for all people, is to interact with other human beings. And then we've recognized that that's what makes us more special than other animals in terms of how we interact, how we're able to communicate at a deeper level. And you can't connect if you can't have conflict. I feel like that I should
mm,
trademark that somehow.
I like
You know,
that. I
yeah,
might I
connection
might I
can't
might post
come
it on
without
Threads.
conflict. Yeah, yeah, we might have to. Yeah,
Can't have connection
but
without conflict.
yeah,
I
so
like it. I like it.
you gotta have that, dude. And so if but the problem is because of how we've been going, right? One, social media. You talked about people not being in a town hall, so you're not face to face with somebody. So you can get on social media, you can say something, you don't have to necessarily respond. You can run away from it. You don't have to look somebody dead in the eyes and say something. You're not accustomed to that. You don't know how to one say things in a fashion that won't get you punched in the face,
Right.
um, or receive something and not completely lose it and be able to come back. And so I think when somebody does that hard work with therapists, as long as it's a good fit where somebody helps you level up those skills, you can be able to discern, okay, what is truly gaslighting, where there's a manipulation happening, what's a relationship that's not serving me, a relationship that needs to be completed, right? Or
Yeah.
what is something that, oh no, this is just a different perspective and I need to learn how to appreciate it. I need to reflect back and why am I feeling a certain way?
Mm.
And I think that's the lens what I was coming at. But I think you make this amazing point in terms of, I guess maybe 50 years ago, like when we were a community, you had group
Yeah.
therapy with your
Right.
closest loved ones and that kind of stuff.
Well, I think you had both, right? You had alone time 50 years ago, naturally, and you
Mm,
had community time, and now we're lacking both of those things. So on one end, you're not able to think through problems, think through your life, and then two, you're not able to share and listen from other people in an authentic, true body language way. Everything is social media curated. So
right. Right. You're never truly alone because when you are alone, you're on social media and you're connected to everybody. Right.
yeah, yeah,
And when you are with somebody, you're maybe not with them because you're connected to social media or you're elsewhere and you're working or something like that.
nailed it,
It's
100.
like
percent
that.
Yeah,
Was it the thing that I sent you on social media? It was like, yeah, you can do the bats, you can do this stuff, but can you sit with yourself in that
yeah,
alone time with just your
yeah.
thoughts? No stimulation.
Nothing.
Um, and just be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it is scary too for those that aren't used to it, right? I mean,
Right.
we've grown accustomed to 365 days a year getting stimulation, right? But you look at the greatest inventors, the greatest thought leaders, the greatest authors, they all, go on these retreats, go in the cabin, sit by themselves and just think, right? And go through those problems that they're encountering and what humanity is. And I
Yeah.
think out of that comes, yeah, that level up.
I think about this. Andy Galpin, will often talk about this when he's on podcasts and he's telling people about when those high performers. And one of the things he always talks about when you're training, he always wants to have something parasympathetic built in at the end of a workout to tone
Hmm.
down that regulation. And if you are that individual who's go 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 high all the time during the workout, maybe Huberman asked this or something. During the workout, he doesn't even want you to have input, right? So no
Wow.
music, like I'm gonna sometimes listen to a podcast or a book is like none of
Yeah.
that. And I've tried to do that. I know you're a psychopath if you're not listening to something and you're working out right nowadays. Um, the problem is like when you're at the gym, like you have that music, and so like for me, I'm almost trying to drown that out.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
I would encourage. I don't know. Have you ever tried that? Have you ever trained in just silence?
Hmm. Yeah, I'll do it sometimes. With like there's crappy music, and I'm just like, I don't, I'm not trying to lift big. I'm not trying to PR. There's no podcast on my phone. But then yeah, there's times where I'm just like, I'm just gonna lift. Like usually, actually, at the end of my workout, I don't listen to anything. Like my last two, because I just get sick of it. I get sick of input. It's weird. Like
But
in the
you have,
beginning,
but there is
yeah,
music in the gym. Yeah.
yeah, but it's like, yeah, there is. It's like 80s music, and I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
Like, it's like I just want to turn this off. This is terrible music for the gym. I don't know why
Yeah.
they play it, but yeah,
I mean like just
nothing.
silence.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
yeah.
nothing. Like
trying to
if you ever
think.
train at home, yeah, I encourage you to do that. I think you're going to
Yeah.
find that to be almost like a cathartic experience. Like
Hmm.
when I train in my garage, I'll try not to listen to anything,
Yeah,
and it's
when you're
just
training. Yeah.
me, and the only sounds you're hearing is, if it's the bar racking, that's it. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, we know, and I was reading something about this is like every time you're somebody called these hope molecules. Every time you contract your muscles, your maybe they're talking about myokines. I don't think so, but your muscles release these molecules that they're called hope molecules. I have to look into the validity of this statement. That is actively fighting against those depressed moods, the down moods. I mean, we know the
Hmm.
endogenous endorphin release that you have is phenomenal for uplifting your mood, your brain
Yeah.
health, BDNF, all those types of things. But again, to be able to sit in silence, like we talked about, and if you struggle to do that, okay, go and engage in activity. I think maybe Huberman and Peter T talk about when they go on their 6 hour ruck, no music, no input, just
Okay.
nature, right?
Yeah.
Melissa Sunderman talked about this as well. You're just intaking nature.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. You give it a try. Let me know what you think.
We'll
And
do.
I'm talking
We'll do.
nothing.
It's
Just,
nothing, right? I'm
just
trying to
you
think.
can
I've
hear
never
your
been
breathing.
like,
That's it.
yeah, yeah. I don't think I've ever done a hard workout where like I'm trying to like legitimately push weight, but definitely like hotel workouts and things like that where it's kind of basic. But yeah,
I
I'll
would say I do
definitely.
my best processing of stuff through that time. You know?
Oh yeah, yeah, 100%. That's like me. Like when you're driving in the morning, sometimes it's just
Yeah.
like no music, no podcast, just hour
Yeah.
long, just you know, me,
Yeah.
myself, and I. Yeah,
Hmm.
love it.
Anything else to add on to that? I hope,
No man,
and,
I
and
think
I don't
yeah,
want people to take away. Like I don't think that you and I are suggesting even for a second that these things such as people struggling with mental health issues, anxiety, ADHD, depression, like that is unwarranted. Certainly, if you feel
correct.
like you need the help, you need the help. Please go ahead and get the help. But I think that this piece was really interesting in terms of talking about therapy culture and
Yeah.
the normalization of sharing personal mental health struggles. And it should be creating vulnerability. We talk about the concept of toxic masculinity in the past, but it gets to be a really fine line, and people often blur the lines between normal distress states, again, normal life, as Hormozy says, is versus true clinical conditions leading to overdiagnosis, pathologization, over medicalization, um, and creating a less resilient person, I think, in general.
Right. Yeah. And I would encourage listeners to listen to the Mark Manson episode on it because I think they do a
Yep.
really good job breaking down the scalability of therapy, right? Like we're seeing therapists in schools, we're seeing therapy in churches
Mm,
and hospitals, and it's just everywhere. And when that happens, you get a watered down version of what it means to be resilient, right? And now you're putting factions against each other, right? They're telling kids like, oh, you shouldn't listen to your parents, you should listen to your
right.
teacher, or vice versa. And so what happens is you're actually destroying and dissolving community and the strong threads that actually combine perspectives. And that's what children need growing up, right? They don't need a social media influencer. They need the world around them and the input from around that. Will trauma come from that naturally? Yes, of course. I mean, there's no going, there's no bypassing that, right? And so I don't think the goal through therapy should be eliminate all trauma. It should be how do we cope with the current world that you're in today, not take it away from them and try to make them perfect children. So
Right.
yeah,
I love it. All right,
cool.
man. On that note, we'll sign off here for people until the next one, man.